I'm Yuki Roberts, and I'm the school program director here at Ophelia's Place. So my role is I work primarily with school staff and parents, as well as students, and help support them in doing classroom presentations. We facilitate girls empowerment groups. We also have training available for staff and parents. So if they're wanting to know more about how to talk to their young person about a variety of things, we offer trainings for that.
And I'm River Alland. I'm the Training and Outreach Director at Ophelia's Place. And in my role, I give trainings to professionals who work with youth and families, offering support and opportunity for them to add to their skill set to support the youth in our community. And I also do outreach to introduce new people, new communities, new agencies to the services that we offer. I feel like the issue of body image for young people in particular and girls is kind of a constant. Like it's always
there,
always something that's coming up and causing some amount of concern or distress. Do you think so? Yeah.
I also think that in the return back to school from COVID, there's just a heightened awareness around what people look like.
Yeah.
So much change happened while we were at home, and I think students are still really adjusting to what do I look like? What do other people look like? What does my body look like in comparison to someone else's?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of what I hear is so much around comparison to peers, and what they should be looking like or what their bodies should be looking like. And as we know, bodies are different and are supposed to be different and will always be different no matter what we do. But I think that piece and just all of it feeling so heightened and extra sensitive because we kind of got to protect what we look like for so long.
Yeah.
And that's hard to navigate.
And we talked before, you and I, about the whole kind of Zoom correcting of the face and, you know,
Yes.
and then this heightened awareness of one's face because you see yourself all the time on the screen. And
Mm-hmm.
I think professional people were experiencing that, adults as well as young people. And then, yeah, re-engaging with the larger world and thinking about, you know, what does this mean? We talked about this kind of weird anxiety about weight gain during COVID. And then I think it's also kind of then just re-engaging with larger cultural messages
Mm-hmm.
that haven't really ever gone away. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we've talked a little bit about how there seems to be some real shifts in media around kind of re-idealizing the very, very thin look. And so having adults come to me and even notice some of that, or, you know, young people talking about it, seems concerning for sure. I think that's definitely on people's minds.
Yeah. I think it's also really interesting. So, I saw this article on Facebook the other day, and it was talking about how Cardi B got her butt implants removed. And I just think about that in the context of how confusing that is to young people to see, I mean, very thin bodies idealized, but then also this very thin but very curvy, very soft and voluptuous body type being valued too. And then to see people undo that, like, what does that say?
Right.
What does that mean? And that it is also really confusing to watch kind of our values around what bodies are the good bodies shift so quickly that it's hard to it feels hard to understand or to feel like you fully understand what's happening. And so and as an adult it's confusing too,
Of course.
you know, to say, okay, so I'm supposed to be this way, oh no, now that's shifting, so what do we see happening?
And then I think adults are feeling anxiety around how do I give healthy messaging to the young people in my life, whether they're my students or my children or niece and nephew, or and I think that's feeding into that same kind of, you know, relationship with media and with contradictory informations. And I mean, and we know there's all kinds of other elements like racialized bodies and, you know, all of that, and poverty and all these other things that intersect. But when it comes to just trying to be a positive adult, you know, supporting young people, it can feel really scary to know what to say when we're not even sure how we feel about all these things. Right?
Yeah. I think there's also a lot of anxiety and fear, particularly from parents, around saying the wrong thing, not wanting to cause harm, not wanting to amplify the negative feelings that they're already feeling about their bodies. And as we know, we can't talk about bodies without talking about food. And so
Right.
there's that additional layer, and
Yeah.
parents really struggling with, how do I share and or teach my own values and ideals about food, for better, for worse, whatever they are. Right. And then also not wanting to cause harm, or how do I help my young person navigate body image or food or nutrition or movement or any of those things, because they're all so intertwined. And again, touching back on the social media piece, so much critique around really thin bodies and then really big bodies.
Right.
And so I think that just adds so many layers of complexity to it when you see all bodies constantly being criticized, no matter what they look
there's
like.
no winning of that game.
Exactly.
And I think too, something we've talked about, I hear it in trainings, I hear it in outreach, I'm sure you're hearing it too, even things like cost of living.
Yes.
And how the disproportionate amount of that is showing up in the cost of food.
Mm-hmm.
And so, poverty and these other things have always played in, but now even people who maybe would fit more into the middle class are really feeling that pinch around the cost of food. So that there's this whole other element too around trying to maintain a certain ideal or having goals around the version of life that you'd like to provide for your family, and then the realities of actually navigating that financially, even amongst all these other larger conversations about body types and good food, bad food, which we are not fans of adding value judgment to food.
Of course.
So I think, there's layers upon layers, and that anxiety is really coming up. And we talk a lot about, some of the best things we can do when we don't know what else as adults is just to not talk negatively about ourselves and our own bodies. As I said, not put value on it, certain foods being better than, worse than. So sometimes I think we also as adults get really caught up in our own, I don't want to make a mistake, I don't want to screw this up, to the point where we forget that sometimes it's as simple as just modeling, like honoring your body, respecting your body as this amazing organism that lets you experience the world, and that food is nutrition, and food is pleasure, and food is necessary, and also like cool and fun, and that, as you said earlier, bodies are going to change throughout your whole life. And I think adolescents in particular really that's a concrete reality that doesn't seem as accessible to them sometimes, because those changes are so sudden and rapid that it can feel out of control. And so again, we can just normalize, like, I remember being in middle school and I grew a bunch of inches, or I got boobs, or and just that sense of rapid change and feeling a little uncomfortable in your body is part of a lifelong process too. Like we change our whole lives. So I think all of those are things, when I think about working with adults, that come to mind, is like, it doesn't have to be knowing all the answers. Right.
And that also, it's not this, we don't have to love every part of our bodies. I think that's the message that we get too, right? It's not, okay, you're struggling, but just love your body and everything will be fixed, right? Like,
magic bullet.
Affirmations, positive self-talk, all of those things. I think a lot of these tools that we try to teach youth and help them further develop those skills, it's not a cure for that. It's an ongoing learning process that continues our whole life. And that it's okay to not love every part of your body. And so I know last year we had a conversation between the difference between body positivity and neutrality. And so really, I know in the last year I've talked a lot to parents about just looking at bodies really neutrally and being able to identify the ways that they serve us and how they are valuable and worthy, but we don't have to be screaming from the rooftops, right, that we love our tummies or we love our arms or whatever, that we can just sit quietly with that.
I love that.
And acknowledge our body and be grateful to it and still struggle sometimes. And so to be able to have skills or options available to help have you navigate that without the pressure
of perfection,
and absolute love and acceptance, I think is really important too.
And I think also remembering, I think about this a lot from even myself or when I'm talking with others, that our bodies and our minds are not actually separate. We are one organism. And so in coming to a place of trying to accept who we are in our fullness, our body's part of that. So when we talk about being neutral, or when we talk about acceptance, and I think I like acceptance because acceptance is more neutral, right? It's like, I accept that this is me, and that my mind and my body are all one person, myself. And I don't want to separate all different parts of me and then judge some and love some, and really just have more of a like holistic, this is me. I'm an organism that will change throughout my whole life. I'm going to have days when I feel more excited about that and days when I feel less excited about that, but that's part of the human experience.
So in our girls groups, we have at least 1 week that's dedicated to body image. And a lot of it is through the lens of using critical thinking skills to look at the messages that we are receiving and how they impact us. And I think that because technology is such an ingrained part of our lives, sometimes we forget that it impacts us, right? That it's almost like in the air that we breathe. It's just constantly there, and always, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, impacting us. So it's really interesting because my experience in group is I will encounter girls that are like, that is not for me. I recognize that is problematic, and there's this acknowledgement and pushback on it. And then I also have girls who have never really thought about it before and have just always felt bad about their bodies and have not been able to identify why. And in a previous conversation we've had, we talked about people are not born hating their bodies. We are not born being critical of what we look like or the shape of our bodies. We learn that, we're taught that. And so to be able to pretty much answer the question of why do I feel this way and say it's not you, it's all of this other messaging that we get. And it's hard as a young person. I think back to when I was a teenager. My dad was always on a diet, always doing something else. I mean, I like every new diet that came out, he was trying it.
My mom.
And so to see that modeled for you as something just really normal that adults do, and that you should always be striving for a certain image or something more than what you already have, whether or not you think that impacts you, it stays with you. And so I just think about in my life, what I want to model in my house for my kids is really different than so many other messaging that young people are getting. So for me, to be able to help them navigate that and come to the realization that it is not their fault. It is not because they are doing something wrong or because they are wrong. And that there are ways to navigate that in a way where, again, like you were saying, we can accept and just acknowledge and validate our own experience, is really powerful and really profound to me, but it's constant. And so sometimes you can give people the tools, and you can have those conversations, and it still just is hard to navigate, and it doesn't feel any less bad.
Yeah, and that girls will talk about that when given a safe space, right? That whether it's in group, whether it's in our space, that sometimes just having an adult even ask the question or share some of the like when you do the whole deconstructing of the media, I think it's kind of empowering, because there's this moment where you see the light bulb of like, wait, this is deliberate, or this is done, that like this isn't just sort of universal truth like you're saying, where we just, it's in our air and we don't question it, is really powerful. Even if it's not like, now you're just good, it's like I'm thinking about, like you said, critically, like that maybe these messages aren't for my own good, or maybe they come from something other than just what is normal. And I think that's super powerful that you get to do that in that work.
I think there's also a lot of value in having girls see other girls also struggle with body image, and not feeling so alone in that, because I think that when we struggle with what we look like or just any parts of ourselves, that feels really isolating. Like I am the only one that thinks this way or feels this way or looks this way. And so to hold space in a group where there are lots of different body types, lots of different experiences, all of that, and for everyone to come together, and even myself as the adult in the room being able to say, this is hard for me still, and I'm working on it, and that also we can name it in this space, and we can acknowledge it, and we can work through it together, and we can support one another in this, is really amazing to watch all of those pieces come together.
Absolutely. So I think what I've seen, whether doing training here or out in the community, is there's so much anxiety that adults feel around having any kind of conversation around this topic. There's an incredible anxiety about what's happening with young people and their body image or eating disorders or these other, really harmful and potentially lifelong effects of a culture that polices kids' bodies, adults' bodies, and has a lot of judgment. And especially, I think adults have talked a lot about their worries around social media and the internet and just that profound effect. And also how distorted it is. And I think that one of the things that we can do is, as you were talking about, kind of opening that conversation up with young people, helping them see this is, manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
I think adults making sure they're aware of that. Like, are we remembering that every image you see is mostly altered, that people are using filters, even in video, that, technology has come such a long way that, we can see images that aren't even real. I mean, literally not real. And so if adults are thinking about that and remembering that truth, then when they have conversations with young people, very gently even being able to say, like, I just learned, or I just realized, like, how many of the images I see have actually been altered or have heavy filters, or even before the digital filtering, just the fact that people that you think of, that you see in an image, have whole teams of folks, right, doing their hair and their makeup. And I remember I've shared with adults even things like, when you watch a TV or a movie show, one thing to think about is every single garment that person is wearing has been specifically tailored to them.
Yeah.
So, and that I've seen people just kind of be like, wait, what? Because we think, we're watching some, show on TV, and like we don't even consciously notice. And I was like, every single garment has been tailored to be the best fit to that. Now, how many of us go into a store and find garments that exactly fit our body?
No one.
Right.
Ever.
So I think even those kind of questions and reality checks are so valuable for adults too, because then we can share them and just kind of drop those seeds. We don't always have to sit, as we know, right? We don't always have to sit down with a young person and have a 30-minute lecture about like, all of this stuff. I think we can just have little nuggets that we drop in, little like reframes, or as I talked about earlier, like just modeling, some positivity towards your own body. And with young people, I would say it's a balance, because sometimes we want to be real and be like, on my own journey, I'm not always totally at ease in my body.
Totally.
But we also want to sometimes a little bit fake it till you make it, like talk positively when there's this audience of young people looking to you. And it doesn't need to be about how you look, but, but definitely being able to say things like, I love going swimming in the summer. Like, it feels so good. That's subtle, but what it's conveying is that it is okay for my human body to be out in public doing things I like and enjoying my body and the pleasure of swimming. And so I think there's those kinds of more subtle ways. And then just being willing to question. I think sometimes kids will say things like, I feel fat, or I just wish I could lose weight. We hear that a lot, and it's always kind of this, and I think rather than immediately going to, no, you don't, or, which is our natural reaction, because we want, I think there's some value in being curious to say, oh gosh, what's making you feel that way? Is there something going on with you? And having curiosity about their experience beyond that momentary statement to say, because maybe a kid just got bullied.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe somebody just made a negative, and so what they're internalizing is, my body's wrong and I should change it, rather than somebody being cruel to you or making comments about your body is actually what's not okay, right?
Exactly.
So I think those are some of the things. We also talk a lot about normalizing the enjoyment of food.
Yes.
Right?
It's so good.
It's so good. And
it's meant to be good.
It's meant to be good. And when we show them, you don't need to be ashamed. And I think a lot about like kids that are in fat bodies, how you learn a sort of secret code of proving that you're a good chubby kid, right?
Yes.
So, and you do that by not eating in front of people, or talking about the next diet you're on, or how you're going to work out, or like all these things that are to kind of try to deflect. What it really is trying to deflect is the bullying, right? And the mean comments. But we don't want to say that. We want to actually say it's okay for them to get those comments, because then they'll change. Yeah. So I think all of these kind of even small ways that we can have curiosity, that we can model enjoying bodies, enjoying foods, and also recognizing that weight-based and body-based comments is a form of bullying, and we as adults have a role to step in and say, we don't talk about bodies that way.
Yeah. Well, and I think that if you're an adult who's going to try to initiate that conversation, there has to be a certain level of your own work and learning that you have to do, because like we've already mentioned, this is such a part of the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. We might have biases that we don't even realize are there. And so if we're not trying to bring awareness and attention to our own biases first, those are going to come out in the conversations that we have with young people. And it might unintentionally continue to perpetuate all of the diet culture, fat phobic messaging that we get in our larger society. And so I think you have to be willing to be neutral, or if you are somebody who is really struggling yourself with dieting and body image, you have to be able to put that aside to be able to really promote and have really open conversations like about all the things that you were just talking about. Because if we don't have it together, we might unintentionally be causing harm, and we of course don't want to do that. And
we hear this anxiety from adults too about, they say things like, we don't want to promote, or we're worried about childhood obesity. We don't love the O word here, but I think largely that's been manufactured in our culture. We know this. We have evidence and data that shows it. We know. We also know that there's no health promoting initiative ever in the history of humankind that's worked based on shame.
100%.
And yet somehow we feel like that is sort of okay when it comes to larger bodies, or to some extent underweight or very small bodies. This idea that controlling the body through shaming tactics is somehow a good idea. And we would never want our children to experience being shamed in any other regard, but somehow, and so we won't shame, but shouldn't they? And we just have to remember how diverse human bodies are. We have to remember that with young people, they're in a rapid stage of development. Their brains and bodies are changing so fast, and they need a lot of resources to do that. So we've talked a lot about and it's true for boys too, but for girls, this whole notion of weight gain as a precursor to puberty development, right? It has to happen so that they can have healthy growth. And it often happens with all the genders, right? That there's this period of time when that extra resource is needed for growth. And why don't we frame it that way, right? Why don't we talk about like, your body is, if a kid is commenting like, your body's getting a little extra layer of energy. And it's going to probably need that for growth. And also, even if it isn't, even if you end up with a kid who's a chubby kid or a fat adult, like, so like that's human bodies. Like
that's the biggest thing is like, so what, and how does that impact you? And it's none of your business. And also, I think there's a lot of value to an adults really overtly communicating that your body is not the most important thing about you.
Well, how you look
is not the most important thing about you, because in peer groups, it feels like it is. What you look like, the shape of your body, how thin you are, right? How curvy you are, all of that feels so important, and where all of your value lies. And so being able to just gently push back on that, or offer a different narrative, and being able to validate, and also saying like, there are so many other wonderful parts that make us who we are, and like you said, how our minds and our bodies are connected, that doesn't always have to be in the spotlight, right?
And it connects to, we've talked about this, it connects to things like ableism too. Like what about people with disabled bodies? And are they less valuable because their bodies are different? So it connects to this continuum of sort of acceptance for the full range of humans, right? And the whole way of human experience, and the whole human diversity. And so like, and there's racial elements too. So just remembering that it's not, it feels so personal to that young person. I'm so alone in this. I'm internalizing these feelings and these comments that people are making, but that exists in this larger society that is really, it can be a little bit toxic when we think about how we talk about human bodies. And so we do have small ways that we can interrupt that a little bit that have a big impact. I think that's the big takeaway, right? A small action can have a big impact.